celebrating the power of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, Dr. Jeffrey Keenan.
Welcome to another edition of Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill, and my guest is Dr. Jeffrey Keenan. Thank you for joining us.
My privilege, Hal. Thanks for having me.
Where'd you grow up?
Pennsylvania, the mountains of western Pennsylvania.
Brothers and sisters?
Yep, three siblings, and we're scattered all over the country now.
Tell me about your parents and tell me about growing up in Pennsylvania. What kind of family do you come from?
Small town Pennsylvania. Just a kind of regular middle class upbringing, but parents were both very hardworking people, very thrifty. They both grew up in the Depression, and anyone who grew up in the Depression knew how to save a dime, that's for sure. And so
what did your dad do?
Oh, he actually was in management for a coal mining machinery manufacturer. And of course, back then, coal mining was really, really big, not only in the States, but all around the world. Obviously, things have changed a little bit.
What about your mom?
She was a homemaker. She was a teacher prior to that, but eventually she was able to stay at home with us and clip coupons.
Did they expect for you to become a physician?
Yeah, because for whatever reason, starting at age 5, I said I wanted to be a physician before I really even had any concept of what it was all about.
Do you know why?
Yeah, I'm convinced it was just my destiny as a God-given ambition, because I never questioned it. Normally, wouldn't you think you would question, why in the world do I want to? I just knew I wanted to be a physician, and I did not know even what field of medicine I'd want to go in. I knew I liked surgery. I knew I liked a number of things, but I just kept being kind of funneled into the right path as it happened, and it was really in retrospect, it's fascinating to see everything that happened.
So, compared to your brothers and sister, your siblings, what did they end up doing?
Sister who's a chiropractor, and brother who's a contractor, and another brother who is in management for Welch's. So, pretty different fields. You've
gone into a field that is very different because the National Embryo Donation Center is here in East Tennessee, and you are involved in that world in a big way. In fact, we were just talking before we started this taping today about a piece in the Washington Post based on one of your adoptions. How did you get into this field?
Well, again, I was kind of led into the field of reproductive medicine. So reproductive endocrinology and infertility is a field where you, among a number of other things, you help infertile couples conceive. Well, assisted reproductive technology, which includes in vitro fertilization and some offshoots.
Is that, help me.
Test tube baby.
Test tube baby.
Test tube baby, I'm sorry.
Right, okay.
Yeah, is one of the significant things that we do. One of the...
How do you, and help me, but how do you make a test tube baby?
Yeah, test tube's a little bit of a misnomer.
Right.
But actually what you do is you stimulate a woman's ovaries, retrieve eggs, which can be done pretty simply and quickly. You allow the sperm and the eggs to incubate, check for fertilization. When fertilization has occurred, you have an embryo. And then you wait for a few days and then transfer those embryos into the woman's uterus. So it's a pretty straightforward process, but it's come a great deal, it's really come a long way since I started this 25 years ago.
Which created for its own self, which created an ethical dilemma.
It sure
because as you got better at doing this, because I remember in the late 80s seeing Time magazine articles about this burgeoning field, if I remember correctly. And so if you're very good and very precise at doing that, you have eggs, you have sperm, you have millions of sperm, you have these eggs. And so if you're very good at fertilization, you may implant one into the woman, but then you may have 5 or 6 left over. But these are embryos.
Yes.
And when we have the conversation about life, this is a fertilized egg whose cells can begin to divide rather rapidly and turn and fulfill life, right?
Absolutely.
It is life, but fulfill it. And so why don't we take a break, because I want to pick up there.
Absolutely, sure.
Because this became kind of your passion and your mission.
Yes.
Yes, we help people have babies, but what do we do with these embryos?
Right.
We'll talk about it. This is Anything is Possible. This is Dr. Jeffrey Keenan. We'll be right back.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up.
For the critics who say we shouldn't call it embryo adoption because it's not legally an adoption, I would say absolutely not. It is much closer to an adoption than it is to anything else.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill, and this is Dr. Jeffrey Keenan. The National Embryo Donation Center is right here in Knoxville, and we were talking about you getting into reproductive endocrinology, and you help people, infertile couples, have children. Right. And we described the process. You harvest eggs, sperm, you bring them together, and you place a fertilized egg back into the womb of a woman. Right. And then if it takes, she has a baby.
Right, exactly right.
But the dilemma, the ethical dilemma was, what do you do with these other fertilized eggs? So my understanding is through cryogenics, you can freeze them, but it's life.
Yes. And in my career, we've gone from about 20% pregnancy or delivery rates to closer to 50% delivery rates. So this is a huge increase. I mean, more than 150% improvement in the efficiency of this technology. The problem is we have not adjusted our practices, and as a result, we have more than 600,000 embryos in cryo storage in the United States, many of which...
Whoa, slow down. That number I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
600,000.
More than 600,000.
More than 600,000.
Some people say a million.
That's a million lives.
You got, well, you know what? The only thing I want to say about that is not every embryo will come to be a person when it's transferred.
But that's definitely a million potential lives.
Yes, exactly.
And so when you're holding, man, this feels like a sci-fi movie, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're holding that fertilized egg cryogenically, you have basically suspended life.
You have. And we don't know how long it can be suspended. We don't know that there's any limit. Our oldest or longest time that an embryo has been frozen and we've had a birth with is 20 years. The world's record now is 22 years, but we don't have any reason to think that it can't be 30, 40, or 50 or more years.
Wow. Like if that, yeah, there's some math there and some genetics
siblings
there.
Can be, decades apart in age, as far as when they're born.
So that left you with what as a calling, what as a, I don't want to say crisis, but you had to do something about this.
That's true. You know, it's a real dilemma for these couples who have gone through in vitro fertilization, have been successful in general, and who have a number, even a one or a whole number of embryos remaining in cryo storage. They feel like they've completed their family. They can't have any more children for whatever reason, and there are many reasons for that. And yet they know that their siblings to their children are in frozen storage. And what do they do? And for some couples, it's not any kind of a moral ethical dilemma. They discard them. But for many couples who realize the life and dignity of these embryos and realize their kinship to their own children, that's not acceptable. And so that's our mission at the NEDC. We want to promote and facilitate embryo donation and adoption around the country. We want to educate the lay public about this. We want to educate the professional community. and educate not only on what a great option this is to help the couples who have these embryos remaining, but of course also for couples who are trying to build their family, who are infertile, who in many cases have no other option but this, which is not only extremely effective. We have almost a 50% delivery rate per transfer, but it's also much less expensive than other forms of assisted reproduction. So it's an awesome opportunity on both sides of the equation.
So you keep the embryos in cryogenic storage, and then people adopt them.
Yes.
Now, when you adopt an embryo, do you go through the conventional adoption process? Mm-hmm. Is the embryo Mary Davis? And I am signing up to adopt Mary Davis from Joe and Betty Davis.
Well, so technically and legally, it's not an adoption. Legally, it's a transfer of property. Okay, so that's the legality.
Does it hurt you to say that?
Yeah, obviously, that's not a sentiment that I agree with, but that is the
but legally, that's what's
legal
happening.
definition. It is,
right.
And so you know, I guess when you say embryo adoption, it's more along the lines of, in essence, adopt a highway, adopt a pet, whatever. As far as it's not truly legally, but the idea is the same. You're going to take that embryo, hopefully it will become a child. You're going to nurture it, care for it, love it for all of its life, or all of your life anyway. And so for the critics who say we shouldn't call it embryo adoption because it's not legally an adoption, I would say absolutely not. It is much closer to an adoption than it is to anything else. And you know, the process that we go through is similar. They do go through a home study. A couple of people say, well, you shouldn't require a home study for this. But I say no. Look at the donors who are donating these embryos. They want the best for their embryos for these children that they know will be siblings to their children. They want to make sure that these children are raised in a good and loving home. And there's no other way to do it but a home study.
We talk about anything is possible. This opens up some incredible possibilities. So you were telling me that there's a couple, they actually wrote, the husband wrote an editorial about them adopting black embryos. Now, if you adopt an embryo, the process is you adopt the embryo, then the embryo is implanted in the adoptive mother's womb.
Right.
And she gives birth to that baby. So in this instance, you have a white couple adopting black embryos, and when she gives birth to a black baby.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, and this couple, this particular couple, and the reason why we allowed them to adopt transracially is because they already had adopted a biracial and an African American child by traditional adoption. And the idea of having a pregnancy and a delivery was very appealing to them, so that's why they didn't choose to go through traditional adoption and rather chose the embryo adoption route.
Do you think she wanted to feel an even deeper bond? Do adoptive mothers feel a deeper kinship with an adopted embryo versus an adopted infant?
You know, I don't think so, Hal, but I mean, that's a great question. But I would say that so many women have a yearning to be pregnant, to bond with that child during pregnancy, and to deliver that child, and and to breastfeed the child and have all that you don't have in a traditional adoption. So I think that's important. But to say that they have a deeper bond, I don't know. I would hope not, but I don't know.
I think that would be fascinating research, because if the baby is taking nutrients directly and feeling the energy and spirit of the mother from the time of embryo to delivery, I wonder what that would be like. Now, I have another question to ask along those lines, just in terms of what we feel. How many do you have cryogenically stored here in Knoxville?
Probably over or approaching about 500 sets of embryos right now. And
Can I ask you this? In your donation center, do you feel like you're in the presence of life?
oh,
Does that make
yes.
sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. And
I mean,
doing
is there a spiritual quality when you open up your cryogenic chamber? Do you feel life?
Well, my embryologist does all that, and so we'd have to direct that question to her. But I'll tell you, when I'm doing that embryo transfer, absolutely. And that's a time I say a little prayer every time that these embryos will be able to implant and grow and come to birth. And as I said, so often we're very successful at that.
I have another question for you in a moment. This is Dr. Jeffrey Keenan. You're watching Anything is Possible. If you didn't know it, the National Embryo Donation Center is in Knoxville. If people want to know more, what's the website?
It's www.embryodonation.org.
All right, we'll be back with more in just a moment.
Coming up,
Sometimes embryos don't survive the freeze and the thaw. And yeah, you do more than that. And that's always sad.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. Great stories about great people whose lives prove possibility. This is Dr. Jeffrey Keenan. Do you feel death or the spirit of death when you have to discard an embryo or when an embryo does not survive?
Yes, and great question. Sometimes embryos don't survive the freeze and the thaw. And yeah, you do more than that. And that's always sad. But I guess you try to cling to the hope of the surviving embryos and the potential they have.
So you feel a responsibility. If we created these embryos, we have a responsibility to them.
Absolutely. I mean, we all started as embryos, just exactly like these. And so to say that they really don't matter and that you could just discard them, I think really does not testify to the life, the dignity of the embryo. And what I would say is you're discarding embryos, but what if it was your parents who had done the IVF and you were the embryo that they discarded? What would you think about that? And people don't take that leap, but you need to make that leap.
As you're getting better, so it used to be, I think you said 20%, and now you're at 50%.
Closer to 50, yeah.
Closer to 50%. And I would imagine as the technology emerges, as your ability to do what you do gets a little bit better, you're going to see that number push up. Mm-hmm. And I guess the other ethical question is, now you don't have to, in order for you to have, a really good chance, you don't have to have 20 embryos.
Right.
We can give you a really good chance with 4.
Exactly. We absolutely can give a very good chance with 4. And for some reason, though, our profession really has not taken that to heart yet. And we are still basically, with few exceptions, inseminating every egg that we get and trying to make as many embryos as we can. That's absolutely not necessary now.
Let me ask you about the technology. Is there a way to determine the viability of the egg? So is there a screening process or a test that says, you've got 5 eggs here. Of the 5, these 2 show up as having the best chance at viability so that you don't inseminate the other 3?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, not for eggs, not right now, although...
Can you do that on the sperm side in terms of determining which sperm is most healthy, most vital, and therefore...
No, we have markers that say that an egg looks like it's a healthy egg, that a sperm appears to be a healthy sperm, but any technology that actually looks at them genetically would destroy the sperm or the egg. Now, an embryo is a different story, and an embryo can be tested genetically without destroying it, but not a sperm.
I mean, there has to be a test. There has to be a non-destructive, non-invasive way to look at egg or sperm or both and say this.
And there might be at some point. There just isn't right now. But what I would say to that is, it doesn't matter so much because we can now freeze the eggs and have just as good of outcome as if the egg was fresh. So
Gotcha.
let's inseminate 4 or 5 or 6 eggs, freeze whatever other eggs we get. We'll have plenty for a fresh transfer. If the couple doesn't conceive, or if they do conceive and want to build their family later, then we use the eggs. If they have twins, or like in this couple we talked about, we put in 2 embryos, they have triplets, and they're done with their family, then you discard the eggs. There's no problem with discarding an egg cell. It's just like a sperm cell, and it is not yet human life.
If you do what God has called you to do really well in this work, what's success look like?
Oh, you know, success looks like all the pictures and the letters and the emails that we get from our couples who have children. And it's just, I mean, there's nothing better. I mean, every Christmas, our office just is overflowing with Christmas cards and pictures from children and letters and gifts and things like that. It's just a wonderful feeling. I mean,
So I guess you want to take every one of those cryogenically preserved embryos and turn them into a Christmas card.
oh, absolutely. Wish we could do it with everyone, but we do it with as many as we can.
Thank you for helping to create that possibility.
Thank you, Hal, for allowing me to talk about this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, your life's work is pretty important, and there are lots of people counting on you. So thank you for being on Anything Is Possible.
Thank you very much, Hal. My pleasure.
All the best.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.